All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for logging in. It's great to have you with us. Um, we're very excited to have business professionals like yourself joining us in this deep dive into the effects the lack of childcare has on our economy during our summer series. Before we begin, I would like to go over a few housekeeping rules. We are recording this webinar, so please stay on mute during the presentation. There will be time at the end if you have questions, and you can also use the chat function to ask questions when they come up so that you don't forget. My name is Kim Cullen, and I'm a program manager at the Children's Cabinet. Welcome to our first webinar in the summer series. If you haven't heard about the Children's Cabinet, we are a nonprofit that has been in Nevada since 1985. Our mission is to keep children safe and families together. One of our programs is supporting businesses throughout the state to examine their family-friendly policies and benefits to help support working parents. As you know, quality childcare is not only important to our children and families and the development of our future workforce, but it is critical to the workforce of today. It is essential to today's economy because it allows millions of working parents the ability to go into work, businesses to make money, and the national and state economies to grow. Our summer series Lunch and Learn webinars are meant to build upon each other. Our first webinar in the series is Understanding the Current Child Care Landscape in Nevada. This will set the stage of current conditions in Nevada and why quality childcare is essential to human development. Brianna Cambra, our regional quality director at the Children's Cabinet, is our expert for today. Brianna has worked her entire career in early education and development programs in both direct and indirect services. Brianna also serves as a secretary on Nevada's Association for the Education of Young Children's Board, as well as sits on a variety of Nevada early childhood leadership teams and work groups to advance the services for young children and their families. She will take us through the importance of high quality childcare and the current accessibility and cost. Brianna, thank you so much for being with us today. We're excited to learn more. Go ahead and share your screen.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Kim. All right. Okay. Thank you again for that warm introduction. As Kim said, my name is Brianna Cambra. Today we're talking about the childcare landscape in Nevada. I currently hold a role as a program director at the Children's Cabinet, which means that I get to support our programs and services that really focus on early childhood issues. So those are going to be whether that's people walking into classrooms supporting early education professionals or people supporting adults. And so we really want to make sure that all of our communities in the state of Nevada have access to information to make decisions, to have really strong child and family-centered programming. So today we're going to be chatting a little bit about building some foundational knowledge in the current state of early education in Nevada, and taking a peek at what accessibility and affordability in some of our programs look like. Okay, so we're going to first spend just a couple of minutes focusing on the young child and establishing some of the skills that are being formed in this period of life. We're going to make a couple transitions into the work and care connection, so what that looks like and why businesses should care. And then we're going to move into Nevada's childcare landscape, where we will spend the bulk of our time. So a focus on the young child. I love this little picture. He's so cute. Why do we spend time focusing on young children? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but early care and education programs exist for working families, and we really need them so that families can stay engaged and productive. If a family is concerned about the health or safety of their child while they're at work, they are going to be distracted. If that childcare provider is inconsistent, that parent is going to be missing work. And so it's important that we have options that exist for families so that they can re-engage into the workforce. We also know that young children are the future, right? I mean, it's cliche, but if we don't build in high quality learning opportunities for them while they're young, we are not going to have a skilled workforce when they start applying for jobs at our companies, and we are going to really feel that pain as adults. And so it's helpful to do the return on investment early and help support these young children in their early years. And finally, services, when they're available to young children, it really is going to impact the overall outcome of that human. If you think about, what do I want Nevada citizens to look like? Well, I want them to be productive. I want them to be able to hold like meaningful relationships. I want them to be able to start a business or engage in our workforce. I want them to have an education and pay their taxes. And we don't want them relying on federal and state benefits or being incarcerated. And so how do we get to those outcomes as adults? Well, we get there by building the foundation in early childhood. And so let's take a peek at what's happening developmentally for these kids. So brain development is critical. 90% of brain development occurs in the first 5 years. And if you have heard this recently, I'm so happy and welcome to the conversation. We have been really intentional over the last decade to make sure that this is something that our community members, our working families, our business leaders are hearing over and over again, because it is so critical. The first 5 years talk to what the next 80 are going to look like. And so if we are not intentional about supporting people who support young children, we are going to have very poor functioning, poorly skilled adults and workers in the future. And so in the first few years, there are trillions of connections being made, which we'll take a peek at here in a second. But children are born with all of the brain cells they will ever have. They come primed into the world, ready to experience whatever culture or language or family setting that they're born into. But the connections and the experiences that they have while they're here are what create the basis for learning and for eventual outcomes. So let's take a look at what that can look like. The University of Washington has a really fun graphic that I like to share from the Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences. And it's going to show us a series of slides about how neural connections are formed. If you look at newborn, you can see that we have a smattering of neural connections. Remember, babies are born with all of the brain cells they'll ever have. What's important is the experiences and relationships that build on those brain cells to create healthy connections. And so as that newborn gets older, let's look at the first 6 months, you can really see a strengthening of those connections. It goes from kind of sparse to thick and a tangled mess. And that is what we want to see. We want to see tangled messes of brains, because that means there is lots of really healthy connections happening. By the time we hit a year, you can see that some of those veins, some of those brain synapses, which are the connections between the cells, are really getting thicker. So those information highways are becoming much more developed, which is what we want to see. By 2 years and 4 years, you can see they're becoming highly complex systems. And by 6 years, you see a difference, and it looks like there is less. Can everybody see that? Okay, yeah, that is on purpose. And that is because around age 5, a natural process starts to happen called pruning. And pruning is when our brains start to get rid of kind of superfluous extra information that it's not using consistently or efficiently. For example, all babies are born into the world ready to learn, right? And so they need to be able to be adaptable and flexible and pick up on whatever culture or language they'll be living in. If a young child, say living in Las Vegas, has a neighbor who speaks a different language, let's say Chinese, and they're exposed to that repeatedly, but that child is never taught Chinese, that brain will start to prune that extra language information. So although that young child is hearing all of the phonemes and all of the language parts early, they're not using it. It's not relevant or consistent in their everyday experiences, so they don't hold it. This is kind of like when you talk to an adult and they're like, oh, I took 4 years of Spanish in high school and I can't remember anything. That is why. It's because of neural pruning. It's very normal. But what we're getting at is you can see there's lots of connections happening, and this is the richest time in a human's entire existence for building all of the frameworks for what will be to come. Let's take a peek at how these connections are forming the actual functioning skills we're looking for in productive adults. So executive functioning is a set of skills that allows humans to do things like manage their thoughts and behavior, follow multi-step directions, stay focused, plan ahead, meet goals. And so if you're hearing these, it's very likely that there's things that you want workers to do to be productive in their environments while they're at work. And these are all tied back to executive functioning skills, which are built in ding, 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 early childhood. And so the main goals of executive functioning are described in these 3 categories by a researcher called Dr. Ellen Galinsky. She wrote a book called Mind in the Making, the 7 Essential Life Skills Every Child Needs. And she describes them in these ways. Cognitive flexibility is to be able to consider alternative perspectives, right? To know that there are changing circumstances and I can adapt and respond appropriately when those are happening. Working memory would be the ability of that child and then that adult to store and hold information and recall it. And inhibitory control, this one's really important, is my ability as an adult to resist the automatic impulse, right? To like not grab that extra chocolate bar, to stop yourself in behaviors that you don't like, to, not be mean to a colleague, whatever form or shape that takes. These are really important work skills. And so how do we get there? If you've ever met an adult or a colleague who has trouble with these in your workplace, it's difficult to manage at an adult level. And so we really want to be purposeful about empowering parents and early child care providers in building these purposely through play, through child-to-child interactions, through parent-child interactions, creating safety so that they have lots and lots and lots of practice trying on these skills. So young children need those healthy relationships to grow and develop, and they need safe and caring environments. And so outside of the home, we really need those quality early learning settings to provide those experiences for children. So what does that look like? What does a quality early learning setting mean? Well, it means that there's staff who are trained, right? So just like any other job, we want the workers in that industry to have competence and knowledge that helps inform their practice. And so in this case, it's early childhood development. What is and is not appropriate? What are the typically developing milestones of children? And how do I curb behavior in a productive way? We want safe and healthy environments that children can explore. If the floor is cracked and coming up and children are tripping over it or getting splinters, that's not great. If they don't have a place to be able to play out on the playground and get some vitamin D and some sun on their face, like we really want them to have appropriate environments. And this environment needs to have a huge concentration on adult-child interactions. Learning happens through interactions. Yes, we can have amazing, beautiful toys out, and the child will independently explore those and be learning along the way. But it takes the guidance of an adult to be able to ask some probing questions, to provide language, to provide experiences so that the child can really get the most out of that material. We also want to see strong family engagement and involvement. We want schools and pre-K teachers, kindergarten teachers, and early childhood professionals to be inviting families in, to be having conversations, to be a shared partner in the work of that child. And we want to be able to assess the growth of that child and their ability to meet developmental milestones and be giving families feedback on that. So all of this to say, what does it do? The child is building their brain. They have access to a quality environment. What does a high quality program provide in terms of outcomes? Well, let's look at it. When they are in kindergarten and elementary school, so this is going to be about that 6 to 10-year-old age range, we see improved skills across the board, improved school readiness and math and language ability. They're less likely to be in special education, less likely to repeat a grade. So those high quality learning experiences are allowing that child not only to be typically developing, but to need less interventions, which is fantastic. By middle and high school, we're really starting to see less intervention. Remember, when we focus on early childhood, we have better outcomes and we're having to do less work on the end. And so we don't need as many intervention programs. So they're less likely to be in juvenile detention. They're more likely to graduate high school. Hooray, these are fantastic. So as they launch from education into adulthood, they're more likely to be in a highly skilled job. Yes, this is what we want for Nevada's economy. And they're less likely to commit a crime or felony. Double gold star. And so all of these outcomes are what we were talking about before of what do we want in a productive citizen in Nevada in the future. We don't want them to have to rely on social assistance programs, and we want them to be independent and autonomous and productive. We get there through having quality early childhood experiences. And there is a large body of research. James Heckman has done some Nobel Prize winning work around the economy and the return on investment for children. And I'd like to share what this looks like with you. So you can see here, this is a graphic. There's kind of a lot going on, but let me explain. It's showing you that on the left-hand side, you get a higher rate of investment the earlier you put the dollars in. So you get a huge, huge return on investment. It's about a $13 for every $1 spent when you actually start supporting families and early childhood programming prenatally. And then you can see that return on investment goes down as the child gets older. We talk a lot at the state and systems level about workforce training and workforce pipelines and upskilling, which is fantastic. We need those programs, but it's also too late. That post-school age, and we're really just trying to capture those adults who are not in our systems, who we need to be productive. It's much easier to start prenatally, early childhood and preschool, and be building foundational programming so that children have good outcomes, they have strong executive functioning skills, they're more likely to graduate high school and be in a skilled job as adults, and we get that 13-to-1 investment. So it's a win-win. We want to be investing in human capital early. A unique thing about Nevada is we rely almost entirely on federal funding in order to support our early childhood system. And that is a little different than some of the other states. A lot of states use some state funding to be able to capitalize on early childhood systems, but we don't have a state income tax. And so our revenue sources are much more condensed than would, say, a state back east. And so we have to heavily rely on federal block grants as well as grant-funded programs and philanthropy. And then we have a small portion of the state budget that helps support early childhood. But when you look at the percent of the state budget that is allocated to early childhood in comparison to the population of Nevada that is early childhood, we have a gap. So we are not investing nearly as much from the state general budget as we could to support early childhood programming. So now we're going to pivot and spend just a couple of minutes between okay, so we've talked about early childhood, it's important. What does that have to do with work? Well, the connection to work is so important. And we talked about that. It's those later outcomes. It's the ability to have successful and skilled workers. And I'm only going to spend a couple of minutes here because the rest of this summer webinar series is really going to be doing a much better job and a deeper dive at exploring some of these foundational concepts. So some high-level impacts of the care problem on businesses are absenteeism. The Bureau of Labor Statistics did a state-by-state comparison and analysis, and they're estimating 740,000 employees on average are missing work each year because of childcare challenges, and that is completely not showing up. That is not leaving early, coming in late, having to dip into PTO, and so when our children do not have access to care, it's going to impact our ability to do our jobs. So absenteeism is a big red flag. Recruitment and retention, though, we want people to stay we spend so much time and energy getting them into the business. We don't want to be bleeding out the employees that we've put all of this capital into, and re-engaging families when they have a child back into the workforce is really critical. And that can be difficult if you're not competitive or offering benefits or policy packages that allow them to be comfortable in that reintegration. And being able to work with working families is key to meeting business goals. They stay productive, they're more engaged, they're less likely to quit if we have these increased supports. So let's take a peek at what nationally the modern workforce is saying in terms of these benefits. So there was a Future of Benefits report released this year by care.com, and they were showing that childcare benefits are actually a top reason why employees leave their current job. If you look on the far right-hand side of the blue graph, overall 20%, so 1 in 5 people would switch jobs for better childcare benefits. When you look more specifically at millennials, 1 in 4, 25% would leave their current job for better childcare benefits, and 27% of Gen Z. And Gen Z and millennials, that's only going to increase because they're currently still in that phase of their career. Another interesting thing that I wanted to highlight here is 21% of all generational cohorts in the workplace, all generational cohorts, so millennials and Gen Z included, but everyone else said that they would switch jobs to have better senior care benefits. And so when we talk about care, yes, we're focusing on childcare for this presentation, but we mean family care policies. So can I, as a sandwich generation, take care of my aging mother and my young child? That is a huge pressure cooker for a worker. So this is a really interesting study, and it talks about why we're starting to see this change in employer trends for benefits. So one of the things that we're seeing is a lot more intentional surveying of current workforces to be able to understand the needs. A key here is knowing how many children under the age of 12 your employees are supporting full-time, and then how many of those are under 6. Because under 12, you can't leave them home alone, and they're going to need before and after school care and sick care and summer camps and breaks. And under 6, they can't be left at all. We are really needing another adult to have eyes on that child at all times, whether that's a family friend or neighbor, or a childcare provider, or a preschool program. We need access, and those are costing me time and money. So we'll look at that here in a little bit, but surveying your workforce to understand their needs, critical in making those decisions. Also, increasing flexible work policies. Now, I hear a lot in the flexible work policy, this return to work conversation. Yes, return to work and remote work are a part of a flexible policy, but that's not exactly what we're focusing on here. This is flexible work policies in general. Every industry is different. There's going to be shift work. There's going to be places where you cannot create flexibility. We understand that, but it's about being intentional in terms of the workforce needs and how much autonomy or flexibility can I build in? Can I allow my employees to maybe go -8 hours into their PTO so they could cover the occasional childcare provider issue or dentist appointment? And then, if for whatever reason they decided to separate before paying that back, that would come out of their last check. But what kind of policies do we have to allow for flexible work? And then finally, re-examining that benefit package to support people who are providing care. And again, I'm using care loosely because they're caring for both children and aging seniors. So that's going to be it for my time talking about care and connection, because there are 3 more webinars in this series that are going to do a much better job than I could. And so highly recommend attending those. Let's switch into the Nevada childcare landscape. She's so cute. On the little grass, and I did grass like landscape. You get it. Okay. So Nevada's childcare landscape. Let's look at what the data is showing us in terms of population, capacity, supply, cost, all of the bits and bobs. And so some of the data can get a little bit dry. I apologize. I will do my best to kind of draw your eye to the things that are important. And then we'll have time at the end if you have some Q&A. So this is the population chart of birth to age 12 in the state. You can see that we had a steady increase in under age 12 from about 2015 to 2021. The 2022 data is showing a slight decrease. There's no crazy reason for that. It's just how population trends go. And that 2022 data is not based on the 2020 census tract. This is an American Community Survey data that gets updated every 5 years. So they try to fill in the gaps in between of the major decade census. So all of that to say, we still have almost 500,000 children in the state of Nevada under the age of 12. That's a pretty significant population. And we have seen an overall increase over time between 2011 and 2022 of about 7,000 net kids. Nevada is a childcare desert. And so a childcare desert is when more than 50 children in a tract under the age of 5, so these are going to be kids who need an adult watching them, either have no childcare options or so few that there are 3 times as many children as there are spots. That creates a desert, which is not something that creates healthy systems. All counties in Nevada are a childcare desert. And this is the overall percentage of our Nevada residents who are living in childcare deserts. So you can see 72% of all families live in a childcare desert. And this is not at the county level. It's not even at the city or the zip code level. These are census tracts. So these are much thinner slices so that we can be really specific about neighborhoods and demographics. And still 7 out of 10 parents in Nevada is living in the childcare desert. They have these capacity and access issues. These numbers get bigger when we look at underserved and minority populations. So our Hispanic families are 77% are in a childcare desert. Our rural families, 79%. That's not that surprising. And our low-income families, 80% of them live in a childcare desert. So this really demonstrates that we struggle with the amount of slots and seats that are needed. And we'll do some deep dives here in a few slides. Overall, when you look at that comparatively to national numbers, national's sitting at about 51% of people in the United States living in a childcare desert. Either way, that's not good. So Nevada's not doing well compared to national, but about 7 in 10 is the takeaway there, and about 8 in 10 when we hit underserved populations. So what is the need? Like, how many kids are there and who needs childcare? In the top left-hand corner, I'm going to draw your eye to the percent of children who live in households where all parents work. This is key because if only one parent works and one parent stays home, we assume that that family does not need childcare. It's possible they may need occasional childcare or need a couple of hours here and there, but we're not including them in the data. When we look at all children who need care, whether both parents or if it's a single parent household, that parent is in the workforce, 64% of kids 0 to 5 have all working adults. So that's a lot of that 500,000 overall. When we looked before of the population, we have about 500,000 kids under the age of 12. When you look down to this guy right here, you can see 70% of under 12 have both all adults in the household working. And so automatically we're starting to hear there's gaps here, there's gaps here. If we live in a childcare desert and 6 or 7 out of 10 kids need a spot, where are all these seats? When we look at the overall numbers, Nevada's licensed capacity, so I'm looking at this pink human here, meets 34% of the need for ages 0 to 5 specifically, 34%. So only about 3 in 10 children are able to access licensed care. And so that will create issues for the people that we are hiring and that we are trying to retain, because they will experience scheduling conflicts if they cannot get into licensed care. If you zoom in here to this teal chart, we know that our population centers in the state are going to be Washoe County and Clark County. Elko and Carson are going to be a little bit behind that. When you look at Washoe County, so up north in Reno-Sparks, we're sitting at 70% of kids age 0 to 5, so higher than the state standard. 70% have all parents working. When you look at Clark, 63%. So still, it's more than half. It's 6 and 10 or 7 and 10 children are needing access to care respectively in our two biggest metros. So let's look at our supply. This is our licensed childcare supply, keyword here being licensed. So these are regulated and licensed operators of childcare facilities. We do not have data on unregulated, unlicensed operators. To be clear, in the state of Nevada, if you watch your own children, you're a parent, you don't need any kind of license. If you are watching your children and maybe a family or a friend or someone like that, you can have up to 4 children without being licensed. Once you hit 4 children, you have to go on to a licensing path. So for the sake of this presentation, we're going to talk about 3 different groups. The blue group is what we call centers. So center-based would be things that are community operators. Think of these as like a ABC 123 childcare center down the road. These are generally going to be much larger. They're going to have multiple classrooms. They usually have lots of employees. And most of the time, they're separating kids out by age group. You have family childcare providers, so these are pink. Family childcare providers are owner-operators of their own independent businesses out of their homes, and they can watch up to 6 children that are not their own. That is the ceiling, that's the max in the state of Nevada. So up to 6 children as a family childcare operator. And then a group license, which is the teal. A group license is not one of the primary provider types because it is kind of specialized, but they do feed into the family childcare group provider bucket. A group, so the teal, means that they are operating out of their home and they have 1 employee and they can watch up to 12 children. That's the ceiling. So they're not quite at a center. They don't have like a building and they have multiple classrooms, but they can watch an increased number of children, up to 12 on a group care license. So you can see here that our centers, so the ones in blue, from 2012 to 2023, we had a little curve and then it goes back up. The reason these 2020 and 2022 and 2023 numbers look so healthy is directly proportional to the COVID stimulus dollars. If we had not had federal relief funding, we would have seen tons of businesses close. And so the reason that we were able to maintain our centers and we were able to actually increase the amount of overall operators and owners is because we received federal stimulus funding. So that federal stimulus funding helped support those who were already open and paying for things like keeping the lights on, keeping their staff paid, making sure that their utilities were paid and their rent was paid. And you got to think about it, during COVID, we had a major spotlight that was shined on early childhood. First responders needed a place for their children to go. And if their childcare center was closed, they couldn't go to work. And so we had to have open childcare centers. But it was COVID. And so you had to separate the children and you had to sanitize all the toys and you had to not have soft things in the classroom because it could create transmission issues. And so this created huge burdens for our childcare operators and for the families who ended up working remotely and didn't send their children back to work. Now the revenue of that operator has significantly decreased. So not only are they having trouble keeping their staff, they need many more materials because they're constantly sanitizing between each child, but they also are not bringing in enough revenue to keep the doors open. So all of that federal stimulus money was injected to helping support and keep their doors open. And then there was also a separate stream that we call startup funding. And startup funding was for those who were interested in becoming licensed for the first time. And that allowed them to open up and grow or expand the capacity in the state of Nevada for the number of seats that exist. And so you can see that we went from 412 to 420 to 460. We are so proud of that growth. You can also see over time that family childcare has dipped and group childcare has always been kind of low. So on our next slide, we're gonna take a moment to really look at family and group care. But I want to be clear that this slide right here, in terms of our supply, does not include the bar graphs for our tribal programs, for Department of Defense programs. There's only 3 licensed Department of Defense programs right now, but they're not on here. For the Nevada pre-K seats and family friend and neighbor providers. So they are not on here. However, they were included in the original supply and demand estimates, and they are included in the future graphs. So I just want to be clear that this side specifically is speaking to these three types, but that our overall percentages do account for all provider types. So let's take a peek at those family childcare and group childcare considerations. So same colors, centers are blue, families are pink, and group is teal. If you look at the type of licensed care, you'll see here that the numbers look different than they did on the previous slide. And that is because we're no longer talking about individual owner operators. We are talking about total number of seats. Does that make sense? Okay, so we're not talking about how many businesses exist. We're talking about how many seats exist overall. And so you can see in 2023, we had 46,660 seats in the state of Nevada in center-based care. And we had 932 in family childcare and 603 in group care. When we zoom in to the pink and teal here, so I'm moving over to this right-hand side, what do you notice? I hope you're noticing a decline in the pink. You can see that between 2012 and 2023, we have lost over 1,000 seats in family childcare providers. This is a really big deal. That is a 52% decrease in family childcare. The reason this is such a big deal is because the majority of parents who have infants and toddlers choose family childcare as their first option if a family member is not available, because they want those infants and toddlers to be in one environment, generally with one teacher or one provider who knows their child well, and less kids. If you remember, I said before, family childcare providers can have a maximum of 6. And so if my 6-month-old is one of those 6, there are only 5 more possible kids in that class, as opposed to a center where there might be a little bit more churn in staff and the number of kids enrolled. And so when we're looking at re-engaging first-time moms or families who are expanding and they are looking to put their infant or toddler in care, they're generally looking for family childcare. And our overall seats have constantly been declining, a 50% drop in a decade. And that is a big deal. And also, family and group care tend to be cheaper than center-based care. So you can see how this is going to be a more attractive option for those with very young children. So infants and toddlers. We have some hot off the press data. We pulled from April 30th, we pulled the current active license list from childcare licensing, and our group numbers here have actually increased by 110. So we are now sitting at 713. Yay, we'll take it. But our family childcare dipped again. And so we lost 53. And we are now sitting at 879. So you can see that these two kind of go in tandem, because it's possible that a family childcare move their license to a group care. And so it actually ends up being a wash. But overall, we've had a net gain of about 50 seats with those group licenses. But we need to be really intentional when we look at funding and system structures at the program administrator level that we are targeting for these groups, because infants and toddlers need access to this kind of care. So let's look at those publicly funded programs that I spoke about earlier. So these are the programs that were not included on that original slide. We have state pre-K funds. So these are going to be children who are 4 years old and are attending a Nevada Ready program or a Title I or Zoom funded program, maybe at their local elementary school. Some of the programs and seats are in what we call a mixed delivery system. And so they might be in a childcare center, but operating with state pre-K funds. So they have a licensed pre-K teacher. They're meeting the curriculum and the group size and ratios of that state funded pre-K. But you can see that the percent of eligible children enrolled in receiving services. So this is not all children that exist in Nevada. This is the children that meet the income or eligibility requirements for that specific program. How many of those kids get to participate in the service? So of the kids who qualify, only 15% have access to state pre-K. When it goes to Head Start, only 5% of kids have access. Childcare subsidy, which is the financial funding stream that supports families in paying for childcare, only 10% of families who are eligible can access that service. And this is actually a win because in 2022, it was 5.5%. So we have actually grown that number. But as you can see, 1 in 10 families who are eligible for the service, 9 out of 10 cannot get in. And so it's, again, capacity issues. We need to be really working with our elected officials and our business leaders to be increasing funding in these areas. And then home visiting, we actually have some of the worst home visiting rates in the country. And so less than 1% of eligible children receive home visiting in this state. When you add up all of these programs together, it equals, I have the number somewhere. I think it's something like 5,000 slots. And those are accounted for in that original 34% we meet the demand. So a few slides back when I said only 3 out of 10 children in the state have access to programs, that does include these numbers as well. So moving to, oh, there it is, 5,717 seats. Okay, I was close. So over 5,000 seats, but it does account in that 34%. So let's look at affordability and price. So the price of licensed childcare is really going to vary depending on the age of the kid and where they live in the state. You can see in the top left hand that putting an infant in a licensed center program on average in the state is going to cost about $13,420 a year. And I see somebody smiling. It is really expensive. And then when you look at a 4-year-old, generally in center-based care, these are going to be cheaper because if they group their classes by age, they can have less adults and more children the older the children get. And so their overhead goes down and they can give that price break to the family. Whereas you notice the difference between an infant and a 4-year-old does not dramatically dip at the family childcare level. And that's because they are an owner operator who always has a max revenue of 6 kids. And that doesn't change based on the child's age, if that makes sense. And so on average, it's about $13,420 for an infant and $11,000 for a 4-year-old in center care. And for licensed family care, $10,000. So you can see if I am a brand new mom and I'm returning to work, it's probably a better option for me to take 1, the more cost efficient, and 2, the smaller group size and ratio and 1 provider of family childcare for my little baby. I know that that's the choice that I made when I could. And with my first kid, I didn't have a choice. There were no family childcare operators who could take my child. And so I had to use a center until I could find something else. So center-based infant care in the state is more than attending UNR or UNLV, including fees. So it's a lot of money. When we zoom in on the differences by county, so this is at the county level, you can see that Clark is going to be leading the way in terms of price. So it is going to be the most expensive to send a child to a center in Clark County, with $14,000 average for infants, $11,751 for 4-year-olds. And then you'll see Washoe is behind them. So, because again, those are our 2 major metros where demand is highest. So 13,000 average centers, 11,000 for a 4-year-old. And then you can see that the prices at the family childcare level are much cheaper overall. So you have our average here of 10,000, but you can see that it's going to really vary depending on what county they're in and if it's a rural home provider. So let's look at the affordability compared to median family income. So if we zoom in at the family level, you can see that the median family income for married couples is about $89,000 in the state. And for a female head of household, it's about $33,000. And for male head of household, it's $49,000. So male head of households are doing significantly better economically than female head of households, but these are where the median family income is coming through when we're doing our federal reports. Let's look at how that shakes out in comparison to the cost. So if you look at the cost of care, as a percentage of the family median income, you can see that a single female head of household will spend 40% of her income on childcare for 1 child. That's crazy. And then when you factor in another 30% of rent, that leaves very little money for transportation, food, activities, taking care of your family. When you look, obviously married couples are going to be doing much better than single families, but even still 15% of income would be going to caring for that infant just for childcare. So childcare is very expensive. When you look at family childcare, again, they're not charging as much, but it's still a significant portion of a family's budget. 31% for a single female head of house, or for a single female head of household, 21% for a male head of household, and all families with children under 18, their childcare costs are going to be less because generally they're paying for things like winter camps, summer camps, before and after school, because these are going to, this includes that 6 to 17-year-old range. And older siblings can usually watch younger siblings. Whereas when we're really looking at younger families, it's significantly higher, the percent of their income that they need to support care. So 28% of Nevada's children under the age of 6 live in single mother households. That was one of the questions that I asked myself when I look at the data is, okay, we know that it takes a significant portion of that mother's paycheck to pay for childcare, but how many single mothers are there? 3 out of 10 kids are being raised by a female head of household. So it is a significant amount of female-led households that they are contributing towards childcare. So let's look at, I'm going to zoom past the childcare workforce so that we can spend just a couple of minutes looking at the quality of care and kind of wrap up some of our talking points. Here, I'm just going to draw attention to that the early childhood professionals who are taking care of these children have almost no benefits. And so that's going to account for low pay, low benefits, is why we feel a churn in the amount of licensed operators that are out there. The quality of Nevada childcare is really looking at those considerations we talked about up front. So cleanliness, interactions, amount of materials. And a question I get all the time is, well, like how many centers and how many family childcare providers are there and how quality are they? You can see that in our QRIS, which is our quality rating and improvement system, here we have 353 that are currently active in the program. We have another batch through on the wait list, but of those primarily, you're going to see centers. We have family and group care here, school-based care here, and tribal participants here. And of those, you can actually see that 46% are what we're going to be considering high quality. So 4 or 5 stars, which is amazing. That shows that this program is working because over the last decade, we've been able to take the majority of programs living at a 2-star level, so an approaching quality level, and move about half of those participants to being high quality. So the investment in this program is really working in order to provide better environments for children. But this is how it shakes out. So right here, we have a good portion that are high quality. We have another portion here, this 3-star that is meeting quality. And then we have about 33% that are approaching quality. Okay. So the primary investment of these programs comes through something called CCDF dollars. I'm going to put this on the screen. I'm not going to talk through it because I want to leave time for questions. CCDF is a federal block grant. It's where we primarily get all of the funding to support things like the child care subsidy program, low income assistance for families, quality rating improvement systems, and teacher professional development and credentialing. When we look at the funding that was injected into the state to support early care and education, you can see this huge jump here starting in 2020. Again, that's because of those federal stimulus relief dollars. So in 2021, we had SRSA funding, and then we moved into ARP funding and state ARP funding. I do have separate graphics. If you're interested, you can send me an email. My contact information will be at the end. I do have separate graphics around what those projects specifically supported, but know that most of them supported things like PPE supplies, those owner-operator stipends and grants to keep their businesses open, startup costs, and quality improvement systems costs. So down here, you can see that at the end of 2023, 2 of those funding streams, CARES, this guy, and SRSA, this one, were fully spent out and done. So the only one that's still on the table today is the remaining ARPA funds, and those will be expended by September 30th. And so we are approaching what we call a fiscal cliff, in which we're really having to look at what can the state continue to support based on our typical CCDF block grant dollars. There's some program highlights of some of the work that we were able to do through the expansion. One of the ones that I'm going to just highlight for you right here is in parent supports. We were able to do that subsidy expansion, moving from that 5% of eligible families to 10%. We were also able to waive family copays during that. And one of the really cool resources that we were able to create coming out of that's a parent support, is which is First 5 Nevada. And First 5 Nevada is a resource and one-stop shop portal for families with children under the age of 5. There's this big purple button right when you hit the site that says, see what you qualify for. And so no matter the family or the family circumstance, they can go onto that website, they can click through a couple of screens and give some information, and it'll print a customized resource and referral list of programs that they can qualify for based on their unique circumstances. And it's also got some information on different service categories and some milestone moments. So highly recommend checking that out. And that's something that you can share with working families. So in review, childcare is expensive. 7 in 10 working families in the state have a lack of access to childcare. Family and group care has decreased by more than 50% in the last decade. And the end of federal COVID funding means we will have decreased resources moving into next year. And so we're trying to be really intentional about how we connect those dots and what we can sustain in terms of programs. Okay, I zoomed through that last part because I wanted to leave time in case you had any questions for me, and my contact information is on the screen if you need to send me an email. Anything bubbling up for this group?
You can use the chat or you can come off mute. While you're thinking there, Brianna, that was very informative. Thank you very, very much. We did have just a question in the chat about if we would be posting the slides. We're actually going to be posting the recording. It'll just might take us a couple days to do that. And then I have one question. It was on one of your slides and we kind of zoomed past it. And I know we're really going to dive into this on the third webinar, but I'm wondering if you can just give us like a quick overview of the true cost of care, because it's very expensive, but we also know it's not really the true cost of care, and the normal like supply and demand laws that we're all familiar with in the business world don't apply here.
Mm-hmm. Yes, correct. So there is a gap in what childcare providers charge families and what it actually costs to provide high quality care. Because if they charged families what it actually costs, it would be about $18,000 a year per kid. You can't charge a family $18,000 a year. And so they have to eat that cost, and they eat it by having less materials, less highly trained staff, lower wages, no benefits. And this creates a broken business model because they have almost no revenue, and they can't, and we would generally be using revenue to do things like quality improvements and buying better materials and giving staff increases and raises and sending them to professional development conferences. But if I can just barely pay my bills, and when I have a dip in enrollment, now I'm borrowing from savings, that's not a good business model. And people ask, well, it should follow normal supply and demand laws, because you charge the parents what it costs. You can't charge parents. And so what other industries have done, or I'm sorry, what other countries have done, is they subsidize this at the federal or at the government level, because they know that childcare requires government investment. But the United States has not taken that route to date. And so they put all of the burden on families, which creates a broken funded system for providers, which keeps our quality and our capacity and our wages low.
Which is why we have a supply issue.
Which is why we have a supply issue.
Wonderful. Any other questions before we move on? I'm not seeing anything in the chat. All right. Well, we appreciate everyone's time for logging on today and really taking this deep dive into Nevada childcare today. Our next webinar in the series will be on June 25th, and will feature Joseph Fuller, who's a professor of management practice from the Harvard Business School. And Mr. Fuller will be explaining the economic impact of childcare on business, If you haven't yet registered, you can use that link that's on the screen down there. If you could just take a moment and register for the June 25th webinar, that would be amazing. And then also, if you're a business and you're interested in really examining your supports for your workforce, the Children's Cabinet offers free consultation services. And if we could go to that next slide, thank you. You can use the QR code on the left side of the screen under free consultation to fill out a quick information, and we'll get back to you and schedule something with you. There's also one-pagers on different solutions on our website, and I'll pop that into the chat for you. And then we also run the best places for working parents, and that is a quick 3-minute self-assessment that you can do to see if your business qualifies as a best place for working parents in Nevada. So if you could do us a favor and just take this quick little poll that just popped up on your screen before logging off, we would truly appreciate it. We thank you for your time and are looking forward to see you at our next webinar on June 25th. Have a great day.